Guilt. Guilt. Something we all face in life. Can be because we've broken some kind of moral code, whether it's our own, society's, if you're a Christian, God's. You can look at your life and say, oh, that moment, I was unloving to this person. That moment when I told God I would never do that again, and then I ended up doing it again. Guilt, we can hold it. And if we're honest, it can be pretty heavy. Because the thing about guilt is, how do you fix it? I mean, when you look at yourself and you're like, I have done the thing that causes guilt in my life, I can't go back in time. So what do we do with it? That's what we want to explore this morning. But I think for us to start, we have to parse through kind of the complexity of guilt. And so I've broken guilt down into two major categories. One is guilt because I've done wrong. And so I think this is the kind of guilt we often think of in the church, or if we've harmed or hurt someone, or if we've sinned. It's guilt because I've done something wrong. I've broken either, like we said, my moral code. I had this standard for my life and I just didn't live up to it. Maybe I read the Bible and I see God has outlined ways for me to live and I step outside of those bounds and now I'm guilty. Maybe I actually broke the state or the federal law and I'm guilty. Some of the guilt we hold is this guilt. I've done wrong. I look at it, it's my responsibility, it's my fault. But the second category of guilt, I've called it ought not to be this way. And this is the kind of guilt that if we kind of really examine the root of it in our heart, we would come to the conclusion, I don't know that I should feel guilty for this, because it's not necessarily my responsibility. And so some examples of this could be what psychologists call survivor's guilt. You could be in a tragic situation and you look at someone and maybe they didn't get out of it. Physically, emotionally, mentally, it harmed them. And you're in the same exact situation and somehow you got out a little bit more unscathed. And you look over at that person in your mind, in your heart, and you go, I feel guilty that somehow my life is not as interrupted as theirs was. Man, I can feel this at times. I've shared with you, I've worked at a hospital as a chaplain. I remember when me and Caroline were getting engaged and then getting married, I was unbelievably excited and thankful, but I felt this level of guilt in my life because something good was happening to me, and I knew so many people who just, their life has been tragedy, tragedy, tragedy. We can feel guilt, but when we examine the root of it, it's like, should I have felt guilty? What had I done wrong? No, that guilt was there because life is broken and it ought not be this way. And so my first thought for you this morning, it's not even necessarily from the Bible, although I do think it's the heart of God. That's scary for a preacher to say sometimes. But you can test it. Trust me, you can test it. Is this. I want you to, if you're in here and you've got some guilt on you, I want you to examine, and maybe even later today, examine what category is my guilt in? Because I think a lot of us sometimes carry such guilt with us, and if we really examine the root of it, we would notice it's actually over in this category. I'm carrying so much guilt in my life, but when I examine the root, it actually isn't my responsibility. Maybe the world is just broken. Maybe you've gone through abuse in your life. And that can make you feel, as the victim, guilty sometimes. But the heart of the Lord is that you not feel guilty for something outside of your responsibility. Maybe you're a parent or a caregiver in here, and you're doing your best. You're doing your best, but you're feeling some guilt because there's always something more to do, always something better to be at, always something more to learn to give better care. But you examine the root. Lord, I'm doing my best as a limited, flawed human being. I think He would say to you, that guilt isn't for you to hold. So we've got to start with that. But then here's where we're at. Here's what the sermon really is about. When you do examine the guilt, the roots of it, and you come to the conclusion, actually, that's not anyone else's fault. It's not anyone else's responsibility. It's mine. I broke the moral code. I sinned against God. I went against something I said I would never do. What do I do with that? What does God do with that? Does he bring the iron fist? Does he kick you out of the church? What does he do? What we think he does and what he does are often very different. John chapter 8. Look at verse 2. At dawn, Jesus went to the temple again, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. Verse 3. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and they made her stand in the center. And so we're going to walk through the rest of this passage, but there's really two highlights I want you to see that we're going to examine. The first is this, how we are prone to deal with guilt, kind of our default posture, our default way to deal with it. And then secondly, how does the Lord deal with us in our guilt? And so the first thing we're examining is this, how are we prone to deal with our guilt? And the story starts with these people that the author John is assuming you know something about. So scribes and Pharisees. And so scribes, in that time period, they don't have Amazon, they don't have books, they have scrolls. And they don't have a large number of them, they have a few, because it's quite expensive, one, to train people to read and write. Most people in the ancient era aren't reading and writing things. And then second, the parchment is easily damaged, and so the scribe's main job is to protect, to study, and to even copy down the Old Testament scrolls. And so these scribes, they have a lot of social power in the ancient world because they're learned people in an era where most people aren't. They have access to the words of God in a way most people don't. And so these are religious leaders, scribes. And then the other people that the author talks about is Pharisees. I'm sure if you've been around church for a bit, you've heard Pharisees. They don't always get the best reputation. But these are also the Jewish religious elite. They have high standing in the synagogues. And so at the start of this story, you have scribes and you have Pharisees. And these people are high social status, high social order, and they're experts in the Old Testament law. I mean, they pore over it day after day, hour after hour. They're experts in it. They're the religious people. And here's what they do. At dawn, Jesus went to the temple again. All the people were coming to him. He sat down and began to teach them. So he's given a little Bible study. Then the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious elite, brought a woman caught in adultery, making her stand in the center. So Jesus is giving his Bible study. The religious elite bust into this Bible study, throw this woman into the middle of the crowd, and they say this, verse 4, "Teacher, this woman," just first, notice the language here. They're not being, for us to say it lightly, overly kind to this woman. "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. And in the law of Moses so they're experts in the law. They know the law. They're quoting it. In the law of Moses, he commanded us to stone." And then notice this language, at least in the CSB, "to stone such a woman. What do you say?" So the first question I propose to us is we're trying to explore how we are prone to deal with our guilt. And so I just want you to ask yourself this question. Who are you in this story? And I make this joke a lot, but you're not Jesus. Who are you in this story? Who you are will say something about how you deal with your guilt. Who are the guilty people in this story? On first quick glance reading, we're just like, oh, the woman, of course, caught in an act of adultery, bring her in, yeah. Are the scribes guilty of anything? The Pharisees guilty of anything? Let me show you what I think the scriptures are teaching us here. Again, you have to understand the context. You have to understand the scribes and the Pharisees are experts in the Old Testament law. Let me read you, I know most of you don't memorize Leviticus, but let me read you a few things out of Leviticus, out of the law of the Old Testament. Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. When you reap the harvest, you shall not reap your field all the way up to its edge. You shall leave them, so this little margin at the end of your field, for the poor and the foreigner. Interesting. God's telling his people, hey, when you take your crop, leave just a little bit at the end for people who are less fortunate than you. Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? Exodus 34, 6 through 7. The Lord, a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Leviticus 19, 15. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall actually love your neighbor. Leviticus 19, 17. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly. I could keep going, but I'm trying to say this. In the Old Testament law, the root, the thread that runs through all of it is this, that God is trying to create a nation that is far different than the surrounding nations of its time. I don't know if any of you saw the new movie. I'm going to assume you probably didn't. The Odyssey. Did anyone see it? Interesting movie. Good movie. It gives you this tiny picture of the ancient world and how barbaric it was. How barbaric it was. And in the Old Testament, I'm reading through the Old Testament right now. I'm halfway through Genesis. And I've just seen how evil people are. They kill. Men abuse women. Everyone that has power seems to wield it unkindly. And so into this kind of barbaric world, I'm giving you a context for the story we'll come back to in a second, but in this barbaric world of nations fighting nations, people abusing people, people that have power abusing their power, God steps in and he gives his people, this new nation he's trying to create that looks totally different than every other nation, he's giving them laws, commands to do what? Play this kind of game with them? Gotcha. See ya. I mean, he can do that. He's the author, the creator, the ruling authority over all of us. But what he's trying to do is make a new nation. He's trying to form them to be different. He's trying to get them back to what Genesis 2 had. This kind of peace, this rhythm, this right relationship with others, right relationship with God. Are the experts in the Old Testament law, the scribes and the Pharisees, when they bring this woman before Jesus, are they following the heart of God in the way they are treating her? No. I mean, can you imagine if I did that this morning? Deacons, bring her out. Throw her in the middle. What should we do with her? She broke the law. I hope you would leave. I hope you would tell the newspaper about me. That's what they're doing. Is she guilty? The text makes it seem so. Are they guilty? I think the text makes it seem so. And I know this kind of language of stoning can kind of confuse us, and especially to the modern ear, be a bit like, I don't know what I think about God giving a law that allows people to be stoned. But again, I mean, and I agree, it can be rough to wrestle with, but we should wrestle with it. And again, if we have the context of the Old Testament heart behind God's law and rules, what he's doing is he's saying this: adultery, in all generations, but especially the ancient one, ruins people so deeply. Think about a time period where women usually can't work, and so they are unbelievably reliant on the husband of their family to provide for them. And if that husband runs off and commits adultery, well, in the town, the woman then is outcasted. Her children I hope someone's generous because they're not going to get a lot of food. And so one of the reasons God institutes such a severe punishment for adultery in the Old Testament times is because he's saying it harms so many people. And I'm trying to create a nation that isn't flippant about their marriage for the sake of protection of family units. And so again, stoning, thankfully we don't do that these days. But God is instituting this severe punishment because the crime is so severe and it harms so many people severely. And if you look in the Old Testament, actually, and here's where I think they're so guilty, because every instance where God brings up the act of adultery and institutes some kind of severe penalty, it always assumes consent on both parties. If there's ever abuse, the man gets killed because he abused the woman in that era, and the woman is restored to purity in the town. But in the consensual act of both parties being totally okay with it and running off together, the man is always stoned first. What did the story say about the man? Nothing. Interesting, isn't it? So that's why I'm saying these guys are guilty. I mean, it would maybe be different if they brought both people in, but even then, it's like just using these people. And so here's what I think from the scriptures. As I've studied, as I've wrestled, here's what I see in myself. We, as human beings, are prone to ignore our guilt and project it on others. All the problems with the people outside the church. If the Republicans, if the liberals could just figure it out. If the young people, if the old, whatever you want to say, someone else's fault. And I'm not saying we can't have some, critique or thoughts about different things going on in the world, but I am saying you can do that in such a way that you ignore your own guilt. I can look at other people, and it's a lot easier for me to say, Britt, what'd you do last week? He did nothing last week. Than it is to examine my own heart. Who are you in the story? One of the ways we often deal with our own guilt is to either ignore it or just run away from it. And this makes sense. As someone who has, at different points in my life, run or ignored my own guilt over my own sin, it makes sense. What did they do in Genesis 3? First instance of humans sinning against God. Born into our nature, man, we run and we hide from the Lord when we know we've done wrong. And so I think for us, I think what Jesus is doing is he's saying if you want any shot at dealing with the guilt that can so easily weigh down on your heart, you first have to not ignore it. And that's so counterintuitive. But you have to look at it. And so maybe the most faithful thing for you, if you're feeling the effects of guilt over broken moral law in your life, the first thing you have to do, maybe tonight, is to get down on your knees and say, God, I don't want to ignore anymore. I don't want to pass over. I need to revisit what I did yesterday, last week, 5 years ago, whatever it is for you, to not ignore it. But here's the second thing we can easily do, and I think you see it in the woman. Just crushed by it. Just crushed by it. You ever been crushed by your guilt? You ever done the thing you said you'd never do? You ever did it again after you said you'd never do it the second time? I've done it. Man. You got an event in your life you could go back to in the blink of an eye and think back to that shameful moment of your life? What do you do with that? Makes sense we run and ignore, but man, if it's big enough, you can't run or ignore it. And it just settles upon you as this crushing weight. And I imagine that's probably what this woman was feeling. I mean, how shameful. Cast in between all these powerful, elite people. I mean, the text says she's caught red-handed. Can't justify that. Can't walk your way out of that. Just totally beat down. How would Jesus respond to you when you examine your guilt and you come to the conclusion, I am guilty and there's absolutely nothing I can do to remove it? Verse 6. They asked all this to trap him, in order that they might have evidence to accuse him. Jesus stooped down and started writing on the ground with his finger. And when they persisted in questioning him, he stood up and said this: "The one without sin among you should be the first to throw a stone at her." And if you don't know this story, it'd be interesting to think, what's going to happen? Are they going to pick him up? Then he stooped down again and continued writing on the ground. And when they heard this, they left one by one, starting with the older man. And then at the end, only Jesus was left with the woman at the center. Now that's interesting. Notice how Jesus responds to both guilty parties. He says something to the Pharisees and the scribes. He says something to people who are prone to ignore their guilt. He doesn't necessarily shame them. He does challenge. He does ask a probing question: who of you are here without sin? And so if you, kind of like me sometimes, can be prone to view my own sin and just ignore it or kind of distance myself from guilt, Jesus' question to you this morning is, what sin is within you today? In the context of your family, do you treat your spouse, your kids, your parents, your siblings as you ought, as the scriptures command? We're all human, but God doesn't say that. He asks you to look at it, to examine it. In the context of work, do you treat your coworkers kindly, especially the ones that are hard to love? Where have you sinned this past week? Is it in the realm of sexual ethics? Is it in the realm of your finances? Jesus is asking you to examine that for a second. Then look at what he says. Verse 10. When Jesus stood up, he said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, Lord," she answered. "Neither do I condemn you." That's staggering. I mean, that is staggering. Here is the judge of all humanity. And here's this woman and these men who are totally guilty before the King of Kings, who has been there since the very beginning, who sees into the heart of men and women and sees more sin in you and in I than we even can see within ourselves. And he looks at her. She doesn't even say, "I'm sorry." And they left. And he looks into the heart of the guilty. And he says, "I do not condemn you." Let that land on you. You are, this isn't popular, but you are guilty before God of sin. You've harmed people. You've hurt people. You've gone against his moral code in small and big ways. I've looked at God before and said, I don't really care what you have to say to me. And if I would but come to him, his response when he looks at me in my guilt, I do not condemn you. I don't turn my back on you. I don't throw it in your face. I don't pick up the stone and kill you. Actually, I'll be stoned or killed in your place. That's what's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, she doesn't know anything about the cross at this point. There's a scripture out of Colossians 2:14 that says this: Jesus forgave all of our trespasses, having canceled our certificate of debt that stood against us. He He took it away, nailing it to the cross. And so picture this, your guilt, my guilt, her guilt, their guilt. If we would come to the Lord and offer it to him, Lord, I did wrong. Lord, I did it again. Lord, I have no justification, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What does he do? I do not condemn you. And then he goes to the cross. And this text says, on his hands and on his feet and in his side, he pays the certificate of debt that you are guilty and you owe and you can't pay. But he can. I mean, Jesus doesn't sweep your sin under the rug. He doesn't sweep hers under the rug. Oh, it's all good. Just pretend it didn't happen. It's not what he does. It happened. I remember there was a season in my life where I really did. I mean, it was the most guilty place I had ever been in my life. And I just remember I don't know that my life is redeemable. I just was so stuck in sin. God, what can you do with this? God, I know I'm guilty, but I'm certainly running now because it feels crushing. And this little phrase came to me in prayer one time. I felt like the Lord was saying, Josh, you cannot ever move on from this. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You can't ignore it. You can't run away from it. You can't move on. But you know what you can do? You can move forward. You can move forward. It'll be a part of your story. It'll be part of your story. But I'll redeem it. Not sin anymore. Well, that's easy. What's Jesus saying to her? Well, you can't move on. You can't pretend it didn't happen. But you can move forward. You can move forward. See, the heart of Christ, at least to me in this story, is that when he meets us with grace, forgiveness, when he looks at our sin and our guilt and pays the price for it on the cross with his own death rather than ours, it's supposed to have some kind of change within us. It's supposed to do something in our hearts that says, yes, Lord, I want to go from now on and sin no more. Certainly we know we won't be perfect, but my heart desires to be obedient because you've been so gracious to me. What's happening here? The same thing God was doing with the Old Testament law, trying to form this new nation that looked countercultural to people. He's doing the same thing with this grace. This grace invades your life. It cleans your heart. It reminds you Christ is with you and for you, that you're loved, that you're forgiven, that you have identity in him, sonship, daughtership, and that changes you. It does. To where in the realm of your family, you're not perfect, but you're working to be more kind and more loving because Christ has been kind and loving to you. In the realm of work, you're not being a liar. You're not stealing or cheating. You're being gracious. You're sitting with the person who's awkward and weird at work at lunch. Sometimes. Don't have to every day. Why? Because the love and grace of God found you in your awkwardness. It changes you. It changes you. And so I think the two questions that we should examine at the very end of this is first, will you take your sin and your guilt to God? Here it is, Lord. I mean, maybe the most faithful thing for you tonight, turn the TV off 20 minutes before bed. Go be by yourself. God, here it is. The guilt I've kind of run away from. Promise of the text is he'll meet you like this. Then the second thing we have to realize is, what is our response? What is our response? Well, Jesus said, go. Move forward. Don't be stuck in the prison anymore. One of the things I realized, I got this from a book called Finally Free. When I was in that really guilty stage of my life, there's this line in that book that's so beautiful. It says, for most of us stuck in guilt, if we are in Christ, the prison door is open. We just have not stepped out of the prison. Some of you this morning, you're still weighed down by something you did 20 years ago. And the beauty of this text, the beauty of the gospel, is that, man, the prison door is open. God's actually inviting you to come out of that prison of guilt. And I know sometimes it's like, well, how do I forgive myself? I don't know if you can do that easily overnight, but I do know the heart that can forgive itself has first seen its Savior forgive it. God has forgiven you. If God has forgiven you, why can't you forgive yourself? And so I don't know how all this is landing on you. If you feel guilty, if you're like, dude, I was having a great Sunday until this. But the truth is we all have guilt. We all have broken the moral law at some level. And the Lord longs for us to be free and to walk in freedom. But to do that, you have to do the counterintuitive thing of actually looking at it and presenting it to the Lord. And when you do, you are met with not a Pharisee and not a scribe, but Jesus Christ, who says, I do not condemn you. And that's a beautiful thing. Let's pray.